All right, welcome back to One True Podcast. With me, as always, is Zach Smith, rubbing his eyes. Zach,
It's early.
That's a nice touch.
We're getting into that season, right, where it's football and basketball, and it's just
oh my gosh, the
it's
Novemberness.
that time of year.
The
It's that time of
Novemberness
year.
has already happened, and it's still October. So
It's not November. It feels like the middle of August. It's still 90 degrees. I'm so tired of this.
oh yeah. Well, there's no question the weather is not November, but the calendar feels like it. We do have Mac Engel with the Fort Worth Star-Telegram with us. We were just trying to determine Mac's tenure at the Star-Telegram. Been about a quarter century. Yeah, I mean
can't
that's
believe
I've been at
that.
the Trib 26 years, so I
Oh,
feel
good.
I feel
Bryce,
you.
that's fantastic. We
Yeah.
can commiserate how we've lasted in this.
Right.
Like we're the dinosaurs. We can both see the asteroid coming, and neither one of us will duck. Notice that? Well, maybe it won't hit us. Maybe we can get out of the way of this nuclear winter. It's gonna be all right. It's gonna be okay.
Right. Dodged it a few times.
Right. Yeah, that's
So yeah, guys, let's talk some football. So, don't look now, but both Baylor and TCU are moving in the right direction again. How about that? Um, the Frogs were reeling after a loss to Houston at home, but they've sprung back to life with back-to-back wins. Beat preseason Big 12 favorite Utah. That was on the road, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. And then come from behind win last week over Texas Tech. Pretty exciting game there. The Bears, meanwhile, were definitely fighting for dave-aranda's job going into Lubbock, and then they go out and just hammer the Red Raiders 59-35. Big statement win for Baylor. And then they follow that up with a homecoming win over Oklahoma State. So, Matt, I mean, you see TCU on the regular. What do you feel like has sort of sparked this turnaround for the Frogs? And then Zach, after he's done, kind of give me your take on what Baylor has done.
Well, they figured out a way. Kendal Briles and Sonny Dykes have figured out a way to use their best player, Savion Williams. He's the wide receiver. He's NFL caliber. He's an NFL caliber receiver. He's very unpolished. They had him in line behind Quentin Johnston, who was the first round pick of the Chargers a couple years ago. And he really hasn't matured and developed at the same rate. And all the skills are there, but they couldn't get him the ball. And you would say, well, is that a quarterback problem? Is that a blocking problem? Well, whatever the problem was, they couldn't get him the ball. And at some point, you've got to get your best player the ball. And the one thing, even go back to the Baylor days, the one thing Art Briles and by an extension Kendal have did was we've got to get that player the ball. And so they just moved him in as a running back. And they've had him run real routes or sometimes just wildcat formation of direct handoff. And you can get away with that in college. And the last couple of weeks, Savion Williams has finally really kind of been the weapon and toy and tool that they thought he would be in the offseason. The line is a little erratic. The running game is just kind of the defense has certainly been better than it was against SMU. I mean, it was just embarrassing against SMU and even to some extent against Houston, although the biggest problem for this team has been turnovers. They just are so careless with the ball. And some of that's, they're behind, and Josh Hoover is a really nice passer. It's just a little careless, and you can't be. If the games are close, which we've seen in the Big 12 they are, then the margin sometimes is going to come down to ball possession. And when you keep giving it up, then you're going to have problems. And they did. They just kept putting the ball on the ground. They did against Tech. They should have lost that game against Tech. But they came back, and that's by far and away the most impressive this program has had since they went to the national championship. They should have lost that game to Tech. They had no business winning that game, but they won. And the game against Utah, they should have won that by 25. They blew out Utah, and they just could not put the ball in the end zone. So right now you see a team that's playing to the level of their record, and they are getting better. I have no clue who's going to win this game on Saturday in Waco. None. I mean, I don't have any idea. You could tell me TCU is going to win by 5 or 10. I would say, wow, that's amazing. Okay, I believe that. Or you could say Baylor's going to win by 5 or 10. I'm like, yep, totally buy it. I don't have any idea. But I do think we have a pretty compelling matchup. And more specifically, I think TCU is finally, for the first time since that championship year, showing signs of getting better.
Nice. Yeah. When you were mentioning them kind of tinkering with the offense, it brought back memories for me. There was a season where Baylor just ran out of quarterbacks, and ultimately going into their bowl game, they were down to they ended up moving a wide receiver, Lynx Hawthorne, to quarterback, and came out in the bowl game and essentially ran an old wing
Yep.
tee
Yep.
and set a bowl game rushing record, like with the most rushing yards ever in a bowl game, and won the game. It
Was
was
that against North
unreal.
Carolina?
Yeah, that was
Yeah, I
against North
remember
Carolina.
that.
Yeah, out in Orlando.
Yep.
And I mean, Kendal Briles nothing if not creative. So, I mean, they come up with some
Well,
stuff.
Bryce, I'll be honest on this one. This has he talks to his dad quite a bit. His dad comes up here to see his family, and then I think he's gone to a couple of games. I wouldn't be surprised if his dad maybe gave his son some advice on that because I've that one had Art's fingerprints written all
Hmm.
over it.
Yeah, dude knows offense for sure.
Sure.
Zach Baylor. I mean, we didn't see that Lubbock turnaround coming.
No, and I'd like the easy answer here is Sawyer Robertson. Like it's easy to say like, he's you can't really overstate the impact he's made since he came in as the starter, but I think on smaller level, so, well, not really smaller, it's the offensive line. That they've really like that group last year was not very good. And so to have five people really, really since that Iowa State game when they kind of got blown out in the second half at least. Since the bye week, they've had the same five guys: Sidney Fugar at left tackle, and obviously Campbell Barrington at right tackle, and all this stuff. And that has allowed Sawyer Robertson to have some time in the pocket and make some throws that he's been able to make. And one thing that Jake Spavital that has been saying that he wants to do that now they're actually doing is getting the ball to their playmakers. Michael Trigg, getting him out in the open, he's kind of a handful to bring down if he gets the ball. Same with Ashton Hawkins. We saw him make a like a circus catch against Oklahoma State, and then obviously Josh Cameron has been showing what he's been able to do. So I think yes, Sawyer Robertson is the kind of the catalyst to the turnaround over the last couple of games, but it goes a little bit deeper than that, and I think it's really the offensive line that has kind of sparked the whole thing. So I agree with this game coming up. Like I don't know what to think. I think it could be 61-58. I think it could be a lot of points in this game because
Yeah, I agree.
I think Baylor's defense is improving. It's getting there, but TCU's strongest asset, from what I can tell, is the passing game, and I think Baylor's weakest point is their secondary. So, like, it's going to be an entertaining game one way or another.
Yeah, yeah. So, Mac, you touched on it, but Sonny Dykes' tenure there at TCU, it's not very long, but he certainly has enjoyed a wide range of outcomes.
Yeah.
He comes across town, and then, you may have even read a column at the time, like, is this too much too soon? I don't know. But, or maybe I'm dreaming that, but
No, maybe I know it was. Bryce, I'm at that place where you could say I pretty much wrote anything. I'm like, yeah, maybe. Because
but
I know a member of his staff, Joe Gillespie, who I think is a high school coach now down
yeah,
in
down in
Maryland.
Midway. Yeah.
Midway.
When he left after he was, they agreed to part ways after this last season, and I called him, and he made that he told me he told Coach Dykes that I think it was sometime in November of 22, and he's like, this is too fast.
Mm,
And he's like, normally you have to build up to this. And
mm.
they were getting ready. I think they either were getting ready to play or they had just won at Texas. It was a huge game, right? And they had just won at Texas, and now they're fourth or third or whatever it was, and they were a big underdog, and they handily beat UT. It was incredible for anybody who's watched that series. Like, I can't believe this. because they had shut down Bijan Robinson, and they were just a dramatically better team at the time. And Joe Gillespie did tell Coach Dykes that. It's like, this is too much. Like, we need to slow this down. But how do you, and Coach Dykes said, yeah, I know you're right, but I don't want to.
Right.
And it got them all the way to the championship game where they just barely lost 65-7.
Yeah, it did not go well the national championship game,
Not
but
really.
still an incredible season, arguably, best season in school history. I mean, they had some amazing ones many, many years ago, but um, also some under Patterson. But I guess my question is, so last year they fall back to 5-7. This
Yeah.
year, you kind of have the roller coaster ride. What do you expect from Sonny kind of long term at TCU? And is he there for the long term?
I think he wants to be. I don't think this is a stepping stone job for him. I think he wants to live here. I think he likes living here. I think his family likes living here. It's a good place. And you can be, and he said it's a great time to be a college football coach in Power Four. And you can say that when they're paying you $5 million a year.
Mm.
It's amazing how many you're getting that kind of money. Like, this place is amazing. I love it. I don't know in terms of whether or not he'll make it, because a couple things have happened since he took the job that have dramatically changed the job. And I think the same thing could be said of dave-aranda or any Big 12 coach. The NIL transfer portal thing has just changed this so much that for any of these guys, it's not the same job that they took. Now it's compounded by the fact that you've got an NCAA series of court cases that are going to further change these jobs. And then there's the reality that the Big Ten and SEC have completely gobbled up the top 25. And we knew it was coming, but now that when we look at it visually, like if you look at that top 25, you're like, this is just all the SEC and Big Ten. And so don't get me wrong, the AC, if you're a college coach of the ACC or the Big 12, that's still a good job, and you can win games here. I it's just a small school,
Mm.
and Baylor's in the same boat.
Mm-hmm.
There's smaller schools, and when you're a smaller school and you're trying to compete against Texas, or you're trying to compete and keep a kid from going to A&M or Oklahoma, which is what happened with TCU last year when they lost their best defensive lineman to Oklahoma over money. It's really hard. It's really, really hard. Now, somebody's got to win the games. Somebody's going to get in the playoffs, and there's no reason why TCU or Baylor can't be those teams. So that is your job, is to keep it around it and knock on that door, and maybe you get in and maybe you win a game and you be relevant. That's the job. That's the assignment, and you can do that. Whether or not he can, I don't know. And I'm not trying to duck the question. I think if you're TCU, and I think Baylor's in the same boat, you are a rebuild job. You are not a reload job. You are you have a great team every 2 years, 2 to 3 years, and then you take a step back as your team gets a little bit older and you develop a quarterback and all that. Well, the transfer portal has made that a little bit more difficult, because what if those guys leave? Now you say,
Right.
well, you get new guys coming in. Okay, yeah. But Baylor's best teams, 10 years ago, celebrate those great teams from 10 years ago. Those teams developed, right? It took a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of time. TCU is the same way, the same decade, 10 years ago, those
Mm-hmm.
really special teams and those great games against Baylor. Those teams took time. The team that went to the championship game for TCU, that team took time. That team was older. And then they found God with Max Duggan. Nobody saw that coming. So in terms of Sonny being able to do this, I wouldn't necessarily. TCU spending money. They're doing everything they can. Um, he had a record at SMU that I think people are dismissing. No one had done that at SMU since the Pony Express days. No one. And certainly they've built on that success since he left. I think people forget that. I think people throw away his tenure at Cal.
Mm.
Cal's an impossible job, especially it was then. So I think he's pretty solid. I think for him, it comes down to, can you win 8, 9, 10 games a year? And if you can do, and then make it go on a run type of team. And if he can do that, then he's going to keep his job. And if there's signs that he can't, then he's going to lose it. And I think for me, this season, they'll probably go to a bowl. That's good. It's, what are you doing with Josh Hoover? Assuming he stays, what are you doing in Josh Hoover's third and fourth year? And that will determine ultimately where the middle of his tenure is and where this direction of this team is going.
Yeah. Well, he's already had some turnover at the coordinator position. We've seen that with dave-aranda too, and maybe
Yep.
that's what these guys are gonna be dealing with is just when there is a bad year or a couple bad years. I mean, the coordinators are the ones falling on the sword, but um, speaking of, so you referenced it earlier. We talked a little bit about Kendal Briles. Obviously, he's a familiar name to people down here in Waco. Probably still thought of fondly for the most part. Um, he has bounced around since that Baylor time, been at several different places, but he continues to get good jobs. Um, and I think probably is highly thought of as an OC. He's only 41 years old. So the question is this: do you guys think Kendal Briles will be a college football head coach someday? Or is that Briles' name just, toxic still?
Zach, why don't you take Zach? You go first.
Yeah, I don't like this is a harder question for me since I haven't been around as much as you as either of you, but like just
Thank you for
knowing,
reminding us of
Yeah.
our age.
Thanks.
well, if you guys are dinosaurs, what does that make me?
Right,
Whatever.
right.
Now I'm just being insulting. I'm sorry. Um, no, I think he will. Weird, like I yes, the Briles name, has some luggage attached to it, but like I think, he's young, he's hungry, and he's got a pretty good offensive mind from the best what I can tell. And, you know, um, they're like I think of Jeff Traylor or GJ Kinney, like they're eventually gonna move on from their jobs eventually. And like maybe not a power four school at this point, but like yeah, I think someone's gonna hire him. Like that Jeff Levy got a job, and there's plenty of
Right.
Briles, whatever you want to call it, attached to him. And so like if he's doing a good job and he deserves it and he's a good candidate, like yeah, I think he should get a job and I think he will get a job. So like yeah, I think there is definitely some toxicity to the Browns name, but for me, college football is pretty toxic as it is. So uh,
Well played.
Yes.
Well
yeah.
played. I think he's personally, this is not, I'm not trying to knock Jeff Levy, but I think he's a better coach than Jeff Levy. I
Why do
mean,
you say that? I said, Bryce, you know that. Why do you say that?
well, uh, I guess there was sort of this sentiment when Levy was at Baylor. There was this feeling like, what is he doing? Like, I mean, like there was a little bit of feeling like he got the job um, because of art.
He
And
did. That's
sure,
for
sure,
there's
yeah, and
argument
that
there.
happens all the time, and
Yeah,
it
all the
happens
time.
with it
Yep.
happened with Kendall too.
Yep.
But it always felt like to people that Kendall had proven himself a little bit more than Jeff. Now, I guess you could argue that Jeff certainly has had some good offenses since then. They haven't exactly torn it up at Mississippi State since he arrived there, but tough job in the
Yeah.
SEC. I don't know. It, I now like if just to get personal, I mean, I still have a lot of sort of bitterness and resentment as a journalist over that last year that these assistants were here at Baylor,
Why?
just because of the fact that, you got Jim Grobe there going up and answering all these questions for the program of stuff that, he was not
Yeah.
around for.
Yep.
And I mean, I've always said they ought to build a statue for Jim Crow because he took a job that was a really tough situation
Yep.
and was the bridge to the next era at Baylor. Uh, and then you had all these assistant coaches who we're putting out stuff at 5 o'clock on a Friday, and doing all these news dumps, but wouldn't talk to the media all year long. Um, and then at the end of the year, I thought the offensive coaches in particular had kind of just packed it up, given up. They
Oh,
were
they
already
quit.
they had 1 foot out the door.
They totally did. Yep.
Yeah, and I just thought, and I called him out in a column, and Phil Bennett gave me a call. He wasn't real happy, and I was like, well, because I had basically lumped all the assistant coaches together. Um,
Did
and
he tell you this story that they were going to do a news conference and not coach the game at UT?
no.
He told me, so I have you, Bryce, you probably know this, Zach. I don't know. I mean, I needless to say, this subject is one that I spent a lot of time
Hmm.
on,
Hmm.
and I just kept going and going and going on it. And I have a better, you know, I had a former. He's no longer with us. Mark Hurd. You remember Mark Hurd, Bryce?
Hmm.
He
They have
called
a,
me one time. We were on the phone for about 90 minutes, and he told me the whole thing. I could probably talk about it now because he's gone. It was fascinating. And Mark was Art Briles' biggest supporter.
mm,
And when Mark gave me his point of view of it and what happened, I have a better appreciation of understanding exactly the timeline of events and all these mistakes that were made. I had talked to Mr. Starr. Obviously Ken Starr is no longer with us. Um, I would have fired the whole staff. I always understood firing the staff. I got it. The part that always bothered me on a really personal level was the effort on the part of the administration to single them out as being the most culpable of what was a university-wide blind
sure,
spot.
sure.
And to label Art as the rape coach, I thought was really too much. He and I have talked several times since then. Kendall and I have talked. Kendall wants to be a head coach. I mean, you ask, do I think he'll be a head coach? Yeah, I think he will. But I mean, he's not going to be a head coach coming off of a TCU 8-4 season. He's just
Mm,
not. And they need to have a run where they win 10 or 11 games and get in the playoffs. And then, the offense is flying because that's who gets jobs. I was surprised when they hired Coach Levy, not because I think he's a bad coach. I don't even know the guy. I was surprised just because I was like, well, does that resume really warrant it? And Mississippi State is a career suicide job. They just
mm,
no one comes out of that thing unscathed.
right.
But he had to take it. No, he did. I get it. He had to take it. And I thought if TCU had a bad season, because that's one thing I've written, I don't think Sonny Dykes realized just how much capital he spent to hire Kendall.
Mm,
Even if nothing's happened to Kendall since he left, whether it's Houston,
Mhm.
Florida State, Florida Atlantic, wherever else, it's been fine, right? Offense has been okay, whatever, nothing's happened. Everybody on that staff got a job, but Art. And I mean, hell, the places that he was hired went out of their way to fire him immediately,
mm,
whether Southern Miss, the CFL job, whatever else. Um, so I think Kendall can get a job. Bright guy, smart, but they're going to have to go on a run. And
yeah.
my thought was, had this season gone south, and it still could. I mean, who knows? Zach, you were like, this could be a close game. I could see Baylor winning this game by 20, or I could see them
Very well.
losing by
Yeah.
4.
Yeah.
So let's just say, for the sake of argument, TCU's season goes in the toilet, which is totally on the table. Something's going to change.
Mm,
You have a new administration that's getting ready to start, and something's going to change.
yeah.
And normally they've already dumped the defensive coordinator, so that's phase 1. In phase 2, it's going to be okay. Now what do we do?
Right.
And you can stat your way into you. We all know this. If you want to make a case for a guy, you can always find numbers, right? Well, look at the offense, look at the defense. Okay, well, when were those points scored? When did those things happen in the game or the season? And you can really take a deep dive in it. But I know from an administration standpoint here, I was totally on board with hiring Kendall. I was like, it's fine because of what Zach said. This whole thing's a toxic mess, anyways. So now we're going to play God and the moral police. And to be honest, I think if you really, and I did, spent a lot of time looking at it. I would have fired that whole staff. I
Hmm.
totally understood why they fired them. But when you really, really looked at it, you would say, okay, it shouldn't prevent them from being hired someplace else. And all of
Mm,
them got jobs, and nothing happened with any of them anywhere. Um, and even the one that did, there were certain circumstances behind that are a little like, huh. But I I think Kendall will get a job. I don't think it'll be a Power Four job. I think it'll be like a Louisiana Tech type job. Not that that's a bad job, but I think that's going to have to be his stepping stone. I just don't see Arizona State hiring him. out of TCU. I think he's going to have to take at least one more move.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Coaching is a nomadic profession
Yeah.
anyway, and these guys tend to, level up along the way. And so, yeah, I agree with you guys. I think that he would have to start at a Louisiana Tech, a UTSA, or wherever,
Mhm.
and then build up to the Power Four. Um, but no, I completely agree with everything you guys are saying, and you know, as far as the game, it sounds like our picks are sponsored by Eggo Waffles because you guys are you
There's
guys
like
don't
a fence
don't know
company.
which way you're
There's a
going
fence company sponsoring this, so we can all three sit on it. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. So as far as the Big 12 goes, Zach and I have talked about it on the pod. I think we had Barry Trammell on last week, and we broke down the national scene a little bit. But uh, I'm curious. So it seems pretty safe that the Big 12 will get at least one team in the 12 team CFP. Um, I'm wondering if there's a path to two teams getting in. Obviously, BYU and Iowa State are still sitting here undefeated. Um, if they went through this sort of topsy-turvy, dog-eat-dog conference unbeaten, got to Jerryworld that way, they don't play each other before um, then, and then one of them will have one loss after the conference championship game. um, could both of them make that 12 team field? And then also, just on top of that, just for fun, let's say Colorado wins out. And they're sitting there and they're buzzy and they've got Dion and everything. They got two losses, but is there any path for the Buffaloes to get in? What do y'all think?
Zach, why don't you go?
I think that there's a very clear path for two Big 12 teams to get in. If especially if I mean if both of them are undefeated in the Big 12 championship game, that's easy because then Iowa State's going to have a win over Kansas State and BYU is going to keep doing what BYU is doing. So yeah, that's an easy one. Like yes, there's a very clear path for both of them to get in, and they very rightfully should because even if I don't really like BYU, I don't really trust BYU. They remind me of TCU a few years ago, where yeah, their record is good, but they're
So this
you know
isn't like a Mormon bias. This is
Hey,
clear
I
the
mean, I guess
air.
I cover a religious school, so
Yeah,
it just
that's
can't be a
true.
religious school like bias overall. So whatever. No, it has nothing against BYU Jew, man. Like the
I know. I
quarterback.
love that quarterback.
But like I saw them against Baylor like in the second half, and I know
Yeah.
Baylor's been pretty good, but like Baylor dominated that second half against BYU, and I think if they play a better team like Georgia or Texas or something, it's going to be game over. But Iowa State is way more real. I think that I love Matt Campbell and what he's built and just kind of the toughness and grittiness of that team. So yes, I think both of them could get in and arguably should get in. As far as Colorado, I mean, college football is a TV show more than anything, and there's no more, better actor than Deion Sanders. Everybody wants to have him on TV. So, like, yeah, if they have two losses and they're in the Big 12 championship game, heck yeah, they're getting in because they want TV money wants Deion, like, rightfully so.
Yeah. Mac?
Uh, well, I'm looking at the standings right now. The one we're not talking about is Kansas State.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do I see a path for two Big 12 teams to get in? Yeah, and I'm sure that whenever these polls are released or whenever they finally unveil the 12 teams, if they do put in two Big 12 teams, it'll be done with disgust while they're throwing up because they just want it to basically be an invitational between the Big Ten and SEC. I'm with you on BYU. They've gotten away with one a few times. You know, Colorado should have lost to Baylor. Baylor beat that
Mhm.
team. I don't care. They beat that team, but they lost. They didn't win the game, so who cares? Um, I thought Cincinnati was going to give Colorado a little bit more of a game because I think Cincinnati's got a great quarterback. I think that's a pro. The best quarterback in the league by far is Shador, Deion's son. The one that they want is Colorado, justifiably. I mean, you have you have stars there. You have Travis Hunter, who is a player we haven't seen, probably win the Heisman. I'll probably vote for him in the Heisman. Shador is terrific. If he's not the best college quarterback, he's in the top three. And then you have Dion, who's a victim and a hero in the same sentence. Um, but the one people, Zach, I'm with you. I think Iowa State is good. I think Iowa State is pretty good. Now they've done this before, and they'll step on their face occasionally. That's a pretty good team. That's a quarterback who's been around. I think there's a path. The one that they want is Colorado, but I see somebody beating Colorado. Although that's a pretty confident team. At most two. The ACC thing with Miami and Clemson playing so well are mitigating factors. But I think they can get into, I don't see either one, depending on the draw. The gap between these Big 12 teams at the top and the top teams of the SEC and Big 10 are so big that whomever gets in, they're going to get crushed.
Yeah, unfortunately. And that's not ever a good selling point for Brett Yormark and the conference. But
The only thing I can say to that though is like, yeah, it's one thing to play in front of 100,000 fans in the big hole of the big house, in Michigan or whatever. But like, I think it's probably harder to play in Provo
Oh,
or play in Ames
yeah,
than it would be, for Clemson to go to
yeah.
Ames or Provo. Like that would be where Big 12 could maybe have some shot.
Well, and you that's a really good point. And you talk about the TV show. I know people have feelings about BYU, but adding them to this league was a was a good move. You can make an
mhm,
argument that maybe Cincinnati wasn't the best or whatever, but BYU, that's a globally recognized school. And
mhm.
irrespective of whatever you think about their affiliation with the Mormon Church, that is a globally recognized school. And Provo is a challenge. I mean, if you're going up to that altitude and you're playing in that environment, that team is a challenge. And
Yeah.
so if for some reason they get a home game, which I don't think, let's just say they did, that team, Zach, I think you're right. That team could be a problem for those reasons.
Yeah, and I will say the campus games I think are going to be a lot of fun. Like
Right.
I think that's going to be one thing that's really cool about this new 12 team CFP. It boggles my mind to think that since the CFP started, if it had been a 12 team uh, playoff that whole time, both Baylor and TCU would have been in it multiple times. Multiple times. Baylor had teams that made the Sugar Bowl. That very first year, they finished 5-6 in the thing. And TCU was freaking what, fourth going into last week
Yeah,
or
if you look at
third.
those teams, look at the team that went to the Fiesta Bowl, the team that went to the Sugar Bowl, the team that went to the Cotton Bowl. Those were all super good teams, and those would have been playoff teams.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I don't know if that's a good sign for Baylor and TCU going forward, but I mean, I think it is actually. I mean, I think
Mhm.
there's a path for these teams that are not brand names in college football to make a 12 team playoff rather than a 14 playoff for sure.
Totally agree.
Yeah. All right. Well, Mac, will you be down in Waco this weekend or
I think that's a maybe.
maybe? Okay.
Discussing that today. Since it's only like an hour and a half drive, it's an easy one. I'd like to go, so I think I might. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, we'll save a seat for you if you're down
Thank you
here,
very
and
much.
should be fun. I think you referenced it earlier, but they are honoring those teams from 10 years ago, the Baylor teams,
Mhm.
2013, 2014. Bryce Petty and all those guys won a couple Big 12 championships. Boy, those were some wild years and some good teams on both Baylor and TCU. So,
Oh, those were amazing games.
yeah.
61-58. The
Yeah.
next year in the cold rain after Thanksgiving, those were some amazing teams and
Yeah.
amazing games. My dog is going bananas, so turn
Yeah,
that
that's all
closer to
right.
her.
And I was mentioning this to Zach. You probably heard about this. The next year after that 61-58 game, this was epic trolling right here. In the team
That was
picture,
great.
they lined up 61 and 58 next to each other.
That was great. I love that so much. Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, that is for a while, the people don't believe me, but for a while, obviously A&M playing UT again now takes precedent, but will trump everything in the state. But there was a window when TCU Baylor was the big rival game in this
yeah,
state
yeah,
when Gary Patterson's teams were good in the Big 12 and our Briles teams were good. And that was
yeah.
fun. Those two guys have come around, but there was some real mutual sports disliking between those two.
Oh yes, for sure. Well, cool. Well, thanks for hopping on with us, man, and
Pleasure.
good to see you. And
Likewise.
yeah, we'll see y'all at the games.
Okay.
Take
Zach, it's
care.
good seeing you. Thanks,
Yeah.
Bryce.
Yep.